Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel. Pandemics are a funny thing. Everything changes, but people still cling to any sort of semblance of normalcy. Which is why on Tuesday, March 31st, progressives still celebrated Equal Pay Day, which, according to Alicia Gupta over at the New York Times, quote, represents just how much further into the calendar year American women would have to work to earn what their male counterparts made last year. In honor of the event, Shirlene McCray, the First Lady of New York City, and Jacqueline Ebanks, the Executive Director of New York City's Commission on Gender Equity, penned a piece for Equal Pay Day for The Hill. And that's the piece that we're actually going to be diving into in this video because, oh boy, gang, this thing was a gold mine. McCray and Ebanks begin their piece saying, quote, overall, women working full-time year-round earn 81.6 cents for every dollar earned by men. That comparison of median salaries, based on census data, means that women working full-time lose almost $900 billion every year due to the gender wage gap. This is a common theme that is pulled out of the hat every time the issue of women's pay versus men's pay is put back onto the front burner. Problem is, there's a lot more to it. Now, before going on, let me make one thing perfectly clear. There is, in fact, a gender pay gap between men and women, but the prestidigitation that the left pulls makes you think that this wage gap is all about discrimination. Evil male employers deliberately paying women employees less simply because they're women. Which is not the case at all. First of all, because that is kind of illegal. And it's been illegal ever since the Equal Pay Act passed through Congress and was signed by the President in 1963 as part of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Under the Equal Pay Act, men and women working in the exact same company doing the exact same job are required by law to be paid the exact same wage. And before you ask, no, companies can't skirt around the law by having two jobs that do the same thing, but have unequal pay scales because they're given two different titles. According to NOLA.com, quote, jobs do not have to be identical for courts to consider them equal. If two employees are actually doing the same work, it doesn't matter if their titles or job descriptions differ. What counts is the duties the employees actually perform. In general, courts have ruled that two jobs are equal for the purposes of the Equal Pay Act when both require equal levels of skill, effort, and responsibility and are performed under similar conditions. What's more, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 expanded the Equal Pay Act, making it illegal for companies to discriminate between men and women in matters of hiring, firing, promotion, and the like. So how exactly do we explain this gender pay gap between men and women if it's not really about discrimination? Well, in 2009, a massive 50-study compilation was assembled by the U.S. Department of Labor, and this discovered 6 different factors that go into the raw gender pay gap. The first factor was occupation. The study reminded its readers that, historically speaking, women have tended to congregate in fields of occupation that have traditionally paid less than others. Healthcare and education, for example, as opposed to mathematics, hard sciences, physics, chemistry, etc., and engineering. But the study also said that this has changed. The study said that between 1979 and 2006, the median wage earning of women as a percentage of the median wage earning of men had risen from 62.5% to 80.8%. And the reason for this increase, the reason for this change? The choices that women had been making. Women have behaved differently than they had previously in terms of the skills of the women who have entered the labor force, their attachment to the labor force, and their investment in forms of human capital that are valued highly in the labor market. They note that women have increased the market orientation of their courses of study in high school and college by increasing their emphasis on courses in mathematics and business. Thus, the median wages of women have risen more rapidly than the median wages of men, because the behavior of women in relation to the labor market has become increasingly similar to the behavior of men. Another factor was human capital, a point that really builds on the last point of occupation. Researchers found that from 1975 to 2000, women increased their education, increased their participation and attachment to the labor force, and started to move into fields of occupation that had traditionally been held by men, while at the same time, men began to move into occupations that had traditionally been held by women. In the 80s and 90s, for example, women started going into science, mathematics, and engineering, while men started to go into healthcare and education, i.e., those fields of occupation that have traditionally paid lower wages. Oh, and as a bonus point, the tech revolution of the 90s, where computers became mainstay office equipment, actually helped women more than men, because women tended to work in the white-collar offices where computers were more common, meaning that they had more chance to become more skillful in computer savvy while men didn't. Which I can personally attest to. A Jin could be making my camera and my laptop work right now for all I know, and when that Jin decides to take a 3-day weekend without telling me, well, my reaction tends to be along the lines of... yeah, like that. Career interruptions is another factor at play here. Taking time off to have a child, to raise your child, comes with the sacrifice of reduced income, and this affects women, mothers, more than men, fathers, which is not a surprise. What is surprising, however, is that this difference is not as pronounced as some people have made it out to be, and that in the long run, it's actually men who suffer more from career interruptions than women. The estimated decrease in earnings upon returning to work is 25% among men and 23% among women. They further have estimated that the decrease is quite transitory, and that recovery is quicker among women than among men. 4 years after returning to work, the earnings of women who have taken extended leave are almost the same as the earnings of their continuously employed counterparts, whereas the earnings of men who have taken extended leave take slightly longer than that to achieve such parity. And as already mentioned, motherhood is one of the big reasons why a woman will interrupt her career, and thus it is one of the major reasons why there is a gender pay disparity. But again, the differences are not so stark as one might be led to believe. Quote, having children is associated with a 7.3% reduction in the wages of mothers. After the effects of the mother's absence from the labor force and their consequent diminished accumulation of pertinent experience are taken into account statistically, however, the reduction in wages is decreased to 4.7%. Then, after accounting, statistically, for job characteristics that might be especially appealing to mothers, such as part-time status or flexible work schedules, the reduction is decreased further to 3.7%. Oh, and as a bonus, the study also found that more men just work in occupations outside the home than women, 88% versus 75%. And of these men, they work on average more in their jobs than women, 8.3 hours per workday versus 7.8 hours per day for women. This immediately by itself accounts for 11 cents of the 18 cents wage difference between men and women. But Nate, these women are obviously having their arms twisted in some way that'll make them act against their own best interests. Well, there's a problem with that too. You see, in first world countries where men and women are socially and legally equal, that's where you're going to find the most sex differences. Writing in Quillette, Aaron Neal pointed out that from 1991 to 2011, women accounted for the 75% growth in university non-scientific occupations, but only 27% in university scientific occupations. And no, not because there was any evil white patriarchy holding them back, but because women were allowed to make different choices. In other words, women were making a personal choice as to which occupation to put their bodies. But McCrae and Ebanks weren't finished yet. They then took this dour sketch of the gender pay gap and tied it to the coronavirus. The coronavirus pandemic is revealing the country's economic inequity with painful contrasts. Some workers are able to work from home, pay for childcare, and stock up on food. Others are pushed out of low-wage hourly jobs because of social distancing and must juggle childcare for children released from shuttered schools, women are disproportionately those workers at the bottom. The World Economic Forum built up from this premise, saying, quote, "Women already do 3 times as much unpaid work than men, and caring for relatives with the virus adds to the burden." Now, this idea, buried in this paragraph of McCrae and Ebank's piece for The Hill, is probably the most insulting one that there is in the entire thing. And that's true for a couple of reasons. First, because as we've already seen, the gender pay gap between men and women is, more often than not, caused primarily by a woman's own choices. Her level of education, what field she goes into, whether she becomes a mom or not, etc. So the idea that the coronavirus is going to just make the patriarchal system even worse, it's a flat-out lie, because there is no patriarchal system oppressing women in the first place. Also, as of this recording, over 3,000 Americans have died of the coronavirus, and 30 million Americans have been pushed into unemployment because of businesses shutting down, etc. Are you really going to complain that the virus is going to increase your rate of unpaid labor, which admittedly might suck? Okay, let's just be 100% honest here. It probably will suck, because who knows how long we're going to be cooped up inside of our own houses before this whole thing blows over. But if doing more housework and looking after your own kids for the whole day because their schools have closed down is the worst thing that happens to you in this scenario, then I think that you're doing pretty good, especially when, again, people are dying, seeing loved ones die, or they're filling out unemployment forms. Second, this idea of unpaid labor is just flat out insulting. This unpaid labor that progressives screech over, it's taking care of your kids, taking care of your family, taking care of your home. Those are the things that are being dismissed and shredded to pieces here. It's insulting first and foremost because, again, more often than not, women are doing more unpaid labor because they choose to work less in the labor market. Second, because even though it's true that men do less unpaid labor around the house than women, that being because they spend more time in the labor force to earn a living and provide for their wives and their families, men do unpaid labor around the house as well. Lawn care, house maintenance, home improvement projects, and the like. But the worst thing, the absolute worst thing about all this talk of unpaid labor is that it's an attack on love. What these progressives and wizards of smart are actually saying when they cackle on and on about the unpaid labor that women do is that all the things that mothers do for their families, bone of their bone, flesh of their flesh, all of that is oppression unless it comes with a price tag. Unless some pointy-headed intellectual actually comes up with a market price tag for all the things that mothers and wives do, they are saying that you are no better than a slave from the old days. So I would really like to ask these wizards of smart, what is the market price of a wife making her husband a meal at the end of the day? How much is reading a story to your son worth? What's the price tag of comforting your daughter or of caring for your mother? There is no price, because all of these things are priceless. If you believe that all these things that come from the heart have to come with their own price tag in order for you to be free and empowered, then you've been rooked. Remember what Oscar Wilde said. You know, it's funny that at the same time that these progressives are ranting and raging about the evils of free markets, that they then turn right around and demand that we put monetary price tags on everything that we do. Now, astute watchers, and let's be honest, you guys out there are all astute watchers, probably noticed that I spent a lot of time unpackaging the idea of unpaid labor, but I didn't really spend any time talking about McCrae and Ebank's claim in their piece that a lot of women are at the bottom of the economic food chain. And there's a reason why I saved that for last, and that's because that, well, here, they do raise a legitimate point. In terms of helping these women right here, right now, during this coronavirus epidemic, outside of giving them their $1,200 checks, now that the $2 trillion coronavirus relief bill has passed through Congress and been signed by the president, the only thing that's really going to help these women is for family, friends, and communities to do what they can to help them. Now that's going to be a challenge, of course, because of social distancing and everything, but that's going to have to be the best of a bad situation. Checking on our neighbors, giving financial assistance where we can, donating canned food, things like that, those might be the only things that we can do right here and right now. But what happens in the future? Say another pandemic comes 5 years down the road. How are we going to help these low-wage women then? Well, the thing is, none of the solutions that are listed and suggested by McRae and Ebanks in their piece, things like universal pre-K and 3K schooling, a higher minimum wage, and forbidding potential employers from asking about the wage history of potential employees, none of those things are going to work. They're basically going to act like a band-aid on a gushing wound. To really help low-wage women moving forward, we are going to have a shift in our thinking. The first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to actually encourage marriage. Now, a lot of you might be throwing your hands up at that right now and thinking, Nate, what does that have to do with anything? Well, more than what you might expect at first. In 2019, there were 11 million single-parent families in the United States, and 80% of those were women. That comes out to 8,800,000 families. Of that number, a full 50%, 4,400,000, had never ever been married. This is a disaster because not only has marriage been shown to actually increase your own personal lifespan, but it has been consistently connected with higher earnings and higher wages and better jobs. On top of that, of course, marriage just provides you with the love and the support that you need when you're raising a family. And also it lets kids, connect and have a relationship with their dads, which is really important too. Second, and as a caveat to the first point, we have to encourage women to get married, but only after they've received the foundational education that they want. In 2015, 70% of all single mothers had no college education, which is not good when you consider that a constant in sociology is that more education leads to better and higher income jobs. This means that we are going to have to encourage women to postpone motherhood and marriage until after they receive the education that they want, or at least the foundation of it that they want. But here's the caveat here too. This isn't going to just be encouraging more women to earn a college degree, either on a traditional campus or online, where it is more flexible and cheaper. It will mean reforming the education system itself so that a high school education is actually worth what it used to be in the 1940s, where a high school graduate in 1944, for example, was better educated and more educated than a college graduate in 2019. It will also mean teaching people more how to think rather than what to think, so that they will be better able to adapt to a changing job market and economy. And third, we are going to have to get rid of this feministic idea of a power struggle between men and women and instead replace it with the ocean of understanding of the complementarity of men and women again. The idea that men and women thrive and flourish when we're together because we need each other. The gender pay gap isn't here because of discrimination. It exists because of the natural sex differences between men and women, which allows women to make different choices from men, and also because society, instead of taking steps to actually improve women's lives where it legitimately could, instead focuses all its attention on pseudo-solutions that look good on a social justice resume, but which really doesn't do a whole lot of good in the real world. If we're really going to help women, we're going to have to accept the former and change our entire mindset on the latter. But as usual, what say you? What else can we do to actually help improve women who are at the bottom of the economic ladder? As always, let me know your thoughts, ideas, and opinions in the comment box below. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. As always, if you liked the video, whether you agreed with me or not, don't forget to show your support by giving it a like and sharing it with your friends on social media. And if you like videos that talk about society, politics, culture, religion, but from a unique point of view, then subscribe to the channel and ring that bell for notifications. As always, thank you for watching, for giving me a little bit of your day. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed to my channel. I will see you next week, gang, here on Top of the Stone. And until then, stay safe. And don't forget to read, think, speak, and write. Ciao.